Chapter 1, Understanding Special Education. In Chapter 1, Understanding Special Education, the focus is for readers to get a general overview of what is special education, the historical events that shaped and evolved the field of special education, as well as legislation that protects the rights of individuals with disabilities. When we reference individuals with disabilities, it is important for us to use person-first language to emphasize the person rather than their disability. In other words, be mindful not to define individuals by their disability. For example, rather than referring to learning disabled students, refer to them as students with learning disabilities. Also, it's important to change reference from the use of the term handicapped and disabled to less stigmatizing words such as disability or special needs. Not only should we as educators and other professionals take a closer look at the language we use to identify students' abilities, but also we need to look at how we speak about them. It's a matter of changing our frame of mind or frame of reference when educating and working with all students. For example, many educators may label students as rowdy or students with behavior issues, or if that student with a history of academic failure or behavior difficulties, or if that student is just not motivated. Think back to some of the labels you may have experienced or heard educators say about certain students. Just think back to that and how those students may have felt or how you may have felt. So, how can we as educators and other professionals reframe our thoughts or comments about students? Rather than saying that student is a problem or that is a problem student, think about saying, what am I doing to reach that student? Rather than saying they are just too tough or too difficult to teach, think about, well, what is it that I can do, or how will I try new methods? Rather than saying none of my students are succeeding, think about, what am I doing to succeed? What am I doing to help my students succeed? So it's more about changing our frame of reference on how we view and work with all students. When we look at special education, it is important to understand that special education is not just limited to the location of where students may receive their services or receive their support. Three key concepts that form the foundation for what students with disabilities are entitled to receive through public schools include special education, also known as specially designed instruction, related services, and supplementary aids. Specially designed instruction is adapting as appropriate the content, methodology, and or instructional delivery to meet the students' diverse learning needs and to ensure their access to the general curriculum. It is implemented in addition to, not in place of, the instruction the student is currently receiving. So the purpose of specially designed instruction is to meet the student's needs and accelerate their academic and functional growth towards age and grade level standards. Related services are any supportive services provided to a child with a disability or student with disability that helps them access and or receive a benefit from special education. So examples of related services include, but are not limited to, transportation, speech, language, or audiology services, physical or occupational therapy services, psychological services, and counseling services. Supplementary aids and services are aids, services, and other supports provided to children with disabilities or students with disabilities to allow them or enable them to be educated with non-disabled children in the maximum extent appropriate. Supplementary aids and services may include direct services and supports to the child or support and training for staff who work with that child. So supplementary aids and services are not just limited to direct support to the student. So as you're reviewing Chapter 1, take a moment to identify other examples of specially designed instruction, related services, and supplementary aids and services. Chapter 1 also covers legislation that protects the rights of individuals with disabilities, which include IDEA, Section 504, and Americans with Disabilities Act, to name a few. IDEA includes the following 6 key principles to ensure the educational rights of students with disabilities and their families. Those include zero reject, free and appropriate public education, which is also known as FAPE, least restrictive environment, which is also known as LRE, non-discriminatory evaluation, parents and family rights to confidentiality, and procedural safeguards. So let's take a closer look at each one. Zero reject. So all students with disabilities, regardless of severity of their disabilities, they're entitled to public education. So no students will be excluded. That is the basis of zero reject. Let's take a look at FAPE, or free and appropriate public education. Through FAPE, parents and family members cannot be asked to pay for special education services because it is free and appropriate public education. LRE, or least restrictive environment. Through LRE, students with disabilities are general education students first and must have access to the general curriculum to the maximum extent appropriate. When students with disabilities are not receiving instruction along with their peers without disabilities, educators must provide justification for why the student with a disability is not educated in a general education setting. So it's important to consider the IEP team's decisions on the student's least restrictive environment. Now let's take a look at non-discriminatory evaluation. With non-discriminatory evaluation, any assessment used as part of the special education decision-making process must be unbiased and non-discriminatory. Let's take a look at parent and family rights to confidentiality. Through this component of IDEA, educators must ensure that all personally identifiable information of the students with disabilities remain confidential and is only shared with individuals who work directly with the student. So think about those situations where educators may often take work home. Just be mindful of not releasing any personally identifiable information about the students. Also think about communication across electronic platforms such as email or Google Share or Google Drive. You must be mindful of if any information about a student is sent electronically, you must ensure that no personally identifiable information of the student is sent electronically, or you want to make sure whatever platform is being used that the information is secured. So let's take a look at procedural safeguards. Through procedural safeguards, this protects the rights of parents and their child with a disability and gives families and school system means to resolve disputes through due process. So IDEA also identifies 13 specific categories of disability, whereas North Carolina defines 14 categories of disability. The difference between IDEA and North Carolina policy is IDEA defines deaf blindness as one category, whereas North Carolina defines deaf blindness as one category of disability and deafness as a separate category of disability. North Carolina also defines the other disability categories in IDEA. So as you go through chapter 1, be sure to reflect on the following. What does special education currently look like? What should special education look like? What is the role of the parents and their participation in the special education process other than signing consent forms? What can educators and other professionals do to increase parent participation? Also, to apply what you learned in chapter 1, select one of the student cases that were presented at the beginning of the chapter, starting on page 2. Read your selected student case and identify additional services or supports that may improve the student's learning experiences. For example, look at the possibility of using assistive technology devices or modified assignments or collaboration with community partners or community programs, etc. And no, these are not graded assignments. These are just additional activities to help expand your understanding of special education.